right now, your bathroom exhaust vent might be illegally housing a squatter. And this squatter is like actively gathering kindling to start a fire inside your walls.
Yeah, it's a terrifying thought when you really break it down.
It is. And the craziest part is, depending on the species we're talking about, evicting them might actually be a federal crime.
Right. It's not as simple as just calling pest control.
Exactly. I mean, we always think of home maintenance as this, purely terrestrial battle. You pull the weeds, you fix a broken sprinkler, you patch the driveway. But if you just look up at the roof lines and the chimney protruding into the sky, you realize you are unwittingly managing a high-stakes luxury real estate market for local wildlife.
It completely flips the perspective on what a house actually is. Like to us, a house is shelter. But to an opportunistic bird, our architecture is, well, it's essentially an evolutionary cheat code.
An evolutionary cheat code, I like that.
Yeah, because we build these, perfectly climate-controlled, predator-proof, artificially heated cavities, and then we just leave them sitting there, wide open.
Okay, let's unpack this, because understanding that shift in perspective is really the only way to actually solve the problem. We are taking a deep dive today into the incredibly complex world of professional bird control.
And it is complex. Very complex.
Oh, for sure. We're specifically zeroing in on the operations of the Critter Team. They're a veteran-owned wildlife removal company based in Magnolia, Texas. And their process is basically a masterclass in treating the root cause of an infestation rather than just, slapping a bandage on it.
Right, which is what most people try to do first.
Exactly. And it all starts with realizing that the design of your neighborhood itself might actually be rolling out the red carpet for an invasion. Why Magnolia specifically? What makes it such a hotspot?
Well, Magnolia is this perfect microcosm for the issue because of its extreme housing diversity. You've got these two totally distinct architectural profiles sitting right side by side.
Okay.
And they both create a perfect storm for bird problems, just through entirely different mechanisms of failure.
All right, so let's take the older homes first, like those charming 1930s and 1940s cottages near the downtown core.
Yeah, beautiful homes, but they have issues.
They do. They have aging soffit vents, large open chimney flues, and fascia boards that have naturally deteriorated after, decades of dealing with the wild Texas weather. And it's so easy to look at a rotting wooden eave and just see, like, a cosmetic issue.
But what's fascinating here is how instinct overrides everything else.
Right.
Many of these problem birds are what ornithologists call cavity nesters. So for thousands of years, their biological imperative has been to find a hollowed-out dead tree or maybe a small crevice in a rock face, right? Somewhere to safely raise their young.
Somewhere safe from predators.
Exactly. So when they spot a gap in a rotting fascia board or they look down into an uncapped brick chimney on a historic home, they don't see human construction.
No, they see an opportunity.
They see a pre-built premium nesting cavity that requires zero excavation effort on their part.
It's basically a fully furnished apartment with the front door left wide open.
That's exactly what it is. And homeowners with these older properties, they often go years without realizing a bird has claimed a specific vent.
Oh, absolutely. The realization usually only hits when they start to smell something genuinely awful seeping through the bedroom ceiling. Or, they hear desperate scratching in the walls at 2 in the morning.
And because successful nesting sites are incredibly valuable in the wild, those birds, or, their offspring, they'll return to that exact same cavity year after year.
Wait, really? The same exact spot?
Oh, yeah. It becomes a generational piece of real estate. The structural gap doesn't just host one family. It becomes an inherited territory.
Wow. Okay, so you would think the obvious solution is just to buy new construction. Like, we all assume a brand new house built to modern codes is a fortress.
Right, but it's not.
No. The newer master planned communities in Magnolias, places like Magnolia Ridge, Woodtrace, Westwood, they have an entirely different built-in vulnerability that literally comes standard with the house.
That vulnerability is the modern builder-grade materials. Specifically, we're talking about the plastic louvered vent covers used for bathroom and dryer exhausts.
Those little flimsy flaps on the side of the house.
Yes, exactly. And they're designed to be incredibly lightweight for a reason. Like, a standard bathroom fan has very low static pressure, meaning it doesn't push a lot of air.
Right, it's just meant to clear out shower steam.
Exactly. So the plastic flaps have to be light enough for that weak airflow to push them open, and then gravity simply pulls them shut when the fan turns off.
Which means, to a determined house sparrow, those plastic slats are essentially a beaded curtain.
A beaded curtain, exactly.
They just, Wedge a tiny beak under the lightweight plastic flap, push it up, and walk right in. I read in the source material that a house sparrow can push through a louvered cover and completely fill the interior of a smooth metal dryer duct with a massive nest in under a week. Under a week.
They're incredibly fast builders, and once they're past that plastic barrier, they are inside a smooth, cylindrical metal tube.
Which is basically a vault.
To a sparrow, that is heaven. It is utterly impregnable to raccoons, snakes, or larger predatory birds. The homeowner unknowingly provided the ultimate fortress.
And when you factor in the geography of the area, the scale of the problem makes perfect sense. I mean, Magnolia sits right on the edge of the Sam Houston National Forest. So you have dense woods, open fields, and just massive sustained bird populations.
That geographical overlap creates what ecologists call the edge effect.
The edge effect.
Yeah. Birds that naturally forage in open fields and along forest borders, they don't just evacuate when human development pushes into their territory. They adapt to the newly created edge.
So they commute, basically.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Right.
They'll spend their days foraging for insects and seeds in the natural spaces or the manicured lawns. And then, as evening falls or nesting season begins, they press directly into the structures along the edges of the community.
That's wild.
They're exploiting that friction point between the forest and the subdivision out of pure survival instinct.
Okay, so if these birds are just following their biological programming to find the best cavity, the next logical question is, who exactly are we dealing with?
Right, species identification.
Because identifying the specific intruder completely changes the rules of engagement. You cannot just, call pest control and ask them to blast the vents. There is a rigid federal regulatory framework dictating exactly what you can and cannot do.
Which is why correct species identification is the mandatory first step. It is crucial. If you guess wrong, you aren't just using the wrong tools. You're operating under dangerous legal assumptions.
Right. You have to know the difference between an invasive species and a protected native species.
Exactly.
So the two most aggressive offenders squeezing into those tiny vents are house sparrows and European starlings. Both of these are non-native invasive species that were introduced to the United States back in the 1800s.
And because they are non-native, they sit completely outside the protection of the Federal Migratory Bird Treaty Act.
Okay, so no federal protection.
Right. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does not extend protections to them. So in practical terms, that means a professional or a homeowner can legally remove the birds, their nests, and their eggs without applying for any kind of federal permit.
Thank goodness, because their behavior is wildly destructive. Sparrows, like we mentioned, are aggressive cavity nesters that will cram themselves into the tiniest exhaust vents. But starlings are even more chaotic.
Oh, starlings are a nightmare for infrastructure.
They're larger, they nest in huge, dense colonies, and they produce a staggering volume of droppings.
And starlings will actively search for larger vulnerabilities. Like, if they find a compromised soffit or a loose piece of siding, an entire flock will move into the attic space en masse.
Just take over the whole attic.
Yeah. And the sheer noise of a starling colony inside a ceiling is enough to drive a family out of their minds, to say nothing of the physical damage they cause to the insulation and the electrical wiring.
But wait, so if sparrows and starlings are navigating these tight spaces, what about the birds that are just too big for the vents? Like, we see massive flocks of great-tailed grackles all over Texas.
Yeah.
Are native, right? Which means they are fully protected by that Migratory Bird Treaty Act.
They are. And the Migratory Bird Treaty Act is a strict liability law.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning intent doesn't matter. If you harm a protected bird, you are liable. Because grackles are native, the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department dictates that you can only intervene without a permit if there is a documented public health hazard or a significant provable nuisance.
And even if you prove it's a hazard, you are legally restricted to non-lethal control methods, right?
Yeah.
You can't just exterminate them?
No, absolutely not. You are strictly limited to architectural exclusion, physical deterrence, and habitat modification.
Okay.
Fortunately, grackles are physically too large to squeeze into standard residential ductwork. Their disruption is usually external. They roost in massive numbers on roof lines, HVAC units, commercial ledges.
Oh yeah, you see them all over grocery store parking lots.
Exactly. So the strategy there is just modifying the landing zone, so they simply choose to go somewhere else.
Okay, that distinction makes sense for external roosting. But let's bring it back to the cavities, because this is where the DIY approach gets people in serious legal trouble.
It really does.
There is another native bird that absolutely loves enclosed vertical spaces, and that's the chimney swift. They are fully protected, they're native, and you cannot disturb them while they are actively nesting.
Nope, not at all.
Wait, so if I hear a bird in my chimney and just assume it's a starling, I could accidentally commit a federal crime by capping it.
You are. Capping a chimney while a protected native species is actively nesting inside is a direct violation of federal law.
Wow.
You're intentionally trapping and killing protected wildlife. It carries severe financial penalties and potential criminal charges.
That is terrifying. How is a homeowner supposed to know what's in the chimney before they, call a roofer to cap it?
You really have to rely on behavioral cues before you touch anything.
Like what?
Well, chimney swifts have a very distinct, high-pitched chattering call that echoes down the flue. And if you watch the chimney at dusk, swifts exhibit this incredibly acrobatic flight pattern. They'll circle the opening in a coordinated group before diving straight down into the dark.
Okay, so it's a very specific behavior.
Exactly. Invasive sparrows and starlings do not fly, hunt, or sound anything like that. It forces the question, are you absolutely certain what is inside your infrastructure?
And if you aren't,
If there is even a shadow of a doubt, you have to step back and call a certified professional.
that makes total sense. Okay, so let's assume you've made the correct identification. It's a non-native sparrow, it's unprotected, and it's sitting inside your dryer vent. It is so easy to write that off as just a noisy annoyance.
Oh, people do it all the time.
Right, you hear some chirping when you do laundry, and you figure, well, I'll get around to cleaning it out eventually. But that complacency is incredibly dangerous. We aren't just talking about a noise complaint.
Not at all.
These unprotected birds present severe, immediate dangers to the structural integrity of the home and the physical health of the people living inside it.
The transition from nuisance wildlife to critical infrastructure hazard happens very quickly.
Yeah.
The danger isn't necessarily the bird itself, it's the material they bring into your home and the biological waste they leave behind.
Here's where it gets really interesting and frankly, pretty alarming. Think about the physics of a dryer exhaust vent. Its sole purpose is to push incredibly hot, moisture-heavy air and highly combustible clothing lint out of the house.
Right. It relies entirely on unobstructed airflow to operate safely.
Exactly.
And if you restrict that airflow by even 30%, the thermodynamics of the appliance completely change.
Now introduce a house sparrow. They aggressively pack that cylindrical metal tube with dry organic material. We're talking grass, twigs, pine straw, scavenged string, feathers.
Anything they can find.
Yeah. And because the vent is partially blocked by all that, all the lint from your clothes dryer gets caught in that matrix of twigs.
Yeah.
You are basically packing your home's exhaust system with custom-made, highly flammable kindling.
It is the literal definition of a fire hazard.
It's a bomb.
You have a dense plug of combustible fuel stuffed into a confined space. When the airflow is blocked, the intense heat has nowhere to go, so it backs up down the ductwork and into the dryer chassis itself.
Which is not meant to hold that heat.
No. The motor works twice as hard, the heating elements overheat, and eventually, that thermal buildup ignites the lint and the dry nest.
And once it ignites,
A fire inside a wall cavity spreads incredibly fast because it's literally traveling through the home's own ductwork.
and even if you manage to avoid a catastrophic fire, you are still dealing with severe health hazards. I mean, the Centers for Disease Control has extensively documented the risks associated with the accumulation of bird droppings in enclosed spaces.
Yeah, the CDC data on this is wild. The primary concern involves respiratory hazards, specifically a fungal infection called histoplasmosis.
Histoplasmosis.
Right. When birds roost or nest in an enclosed space for a prolonged period, they leave behind massive amounts of fecal matter. And in a hot, dry environment, like a Texas attic or a heated exhaust vent, that matter dries out and begins to break down.
And as it breaks down, it becomes aerosolized. The microscopic fungal spores separate from the dried guano and just float into the air.
Which is the absolute worst-case scenario when the nest is located inside an HVAC system or an exhaust duct that's designed to manipulate air pressure.
Because it just blows it everywhere.
Exactly. If the system forces air past that dried, contaminated fecal matter, it picks up those aerosolized spores and blows those respiratory hazards straight back into the living room, the kitchen, or, out onto the patio where kids are playing.
It completely changes the scope of the repair. The Critter Team's protocol explicitly states that cleaning the contaminated dried fecal material from these enclosed spaces before you seal the entry point is not an optional upsell.
No, it's not a luxury service.
It is a mandatory safety protocol.
If you skip the sanitization step, you simply haven't solved the problem.
Right.
Like if a handyman just slaps a piece of wire mesh over the vent, but leaves the contaminated nest and the dried droppings inside the ductwork, the fire hazard and the health hazard remain completely intact.
You just locked it in.
You've permanently sealed the danger inside the walls where you can no longer reach it.
That brings us to the actual mechanics of solving this permanently. Because once you understand the fire physics and the CDC health warnings, you realize why cheap DIY fixes inevitably fail. You need a systematic approach.
You really do.
And the Critter team handles this with what I can only describe as military precision, which tracks perfectly when you look at the company's background.
Yeah, the founder, Mike Garrett, is a 20-year Army veteran. That makes so much sense.
It does. That operational mindset is woven into their entire process. He holds a Texas nuisance wildlife removal permit and is a bird barrier certified installer. And they don't farm the work out to random subcontractors. Everything is executed by an in-house team of trained technicians.
Let's walk through that execution, because it highlights exactly where the weekend warrior goes wrong. The process never starts with just grabbing a ladder and ripping a nest out.
No, never.
It starts with reconnaissance. A technician conducts a full exterior inspection, checking every single penetration on the roof, the eave line, and the siding.
They have to assess the entire structure because birds are incredibly persistent.
Right.
If you only look at the one vent where the homeowner heard scratching and you seal it, that determined sparrow is just going to flutter 3 feet to the left and find the secondary opening you didn't bother to check.
Because they want that territory.
Exactly. So you have to look for secondary indicators, maybe a concentration of droppings on the brick beneath the vent, or just a few feathers caught in a spiderweb near a soffit gap. Wow, okay. So once they map the vulnerabilities, the extraction phase requires serious care. If you have a densely packed nest sitting 4 feet deep inside a dryer duct, pulling that dry material out is tricky.
It's very tricky.
If you use the wrong tool, or you just try to jam a shop vac hose in there, you can accidentally push the debris further into the ductwork.
Which is a nightmare.
Yeah. You create an unreachable, compacted blockage deep inside the walls.
So they use specialized equipment to fully extract the nest, the eggs, and the debris without pushing it backward.
Right.
And then comes the critical sanitization phase to neutralize that histoplasmosis risk we talked about, thoroughly cleaning the interior of the duct. Only after the hazards are completely removed do they move to the fortification phase.
And fortification doesn't mean a $10 can of expanding spray foam from the hardware store.
Oh, please no.
I know that's the immediate temptation for a homeowner. You see a hole, you buy the foam, you fill the hole.
Spray foam is the ultimate DIY trap.
Why is that?
In the intense, direct heat of a Montgomery County summer, the UV rays and the constant thermal expansion and contraction cause that expanding foam to degrade rapidly.
It just bakes.
It gets brittle, turns to a dusty powder, and completely crumbles away within a year or two.
Leaving the exact same structural vulnerability wide open for the next generation of cavity nesters. It's a temporary bandage masking a permanent problem.
Exactly. To actually solve it, the Critter team relies strictly on custom metal fabrication and commercial-grade bird barrier products.
Okay, heavy-duty stuff.
These materials are engineered to withstand the brutal Texas climate and the physical persistence of the wildlife. Furthermore, the replacement covers have to match the precise airflow requirements of the specific appliance.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, you absolutely cannot use the same tightly woven mesh cover for a lint-heavy dryer vent that you would use for a simple bathroom humidity exhaust. It requires customized hardware-mounted exclusion.
And even for the grackles roosting on the exterior ledges, the approach is structural modification. They use professional deterrents, like specialized spikes, tension netting, slope modifications, that physically alter the landing zone so the bird cannot find a comfortable footing.
Right. It is completely humane, 0 poisons or kill traps are used, and it solves the root cause by removing the architectural opportunity.
It is the difference between endlessly treating a symptom, which is just chasing birds away week after week, and curing the underlying disease, which is the structural vulnerability of the home itself.
Perfectly said.
It's an incredible process. Let's recap how we got here. We started by looking at our homes through the eyes of a bird, realizing that everything from a rotting 1940s fascia board to a brand new builder-grade plastic vent louver looks like a premium, predator-proof nesting cavity.
We navigated the strict legal landscape of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, emphasizing the massive difference between evicting an invasive starling and the federal consequences of accidentally trapping a native chimney swift.
We pulled back the drywall to expose the hidden dangers. How a simple collection of twigs and lint turns a drier duct into a severe combustion chamber, and how dry droppings can introduce CDC-documented fungal spores into your home's airflow.
And finally, we broke down the rigorous veteran-led process required to neutralize those threats, proving why commercial-grade exclusion and custom fabrication are really the only ways to outsmart the biological digger of these animals.
Next time you walk to your car, take a good, hard look at the exterior vents on your home. You might be shocked to see a few pieces of dry grass poking out of those plastic slats.
It only takes a quick perimeter check to spot the early warning signs before they become a structural hazard.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
To wrap things up, I want to leave you with a completely different angle to think about moving forward. As we push toward more eco-friendly, energy-efficient building standards in the future, we are sealing our homes tighter than ever. We're installing thicker insulation, higher efficiency HVAC systems, and incredibly complex climate-controlled ductwork to save energy. But ironically, the tighter and more perfectly insulated we make our homes, the more perfectly designed they become as incubators for wildlife.
That's such a great point.
Right. Our pursuit of the ultimate green energy home might just be escalating the architectural arms race, forcing us to invent even more extreme ways to keep nature out of the perfect artificial habitats we keep building. Keep that in mind next time you hear a chirp in the walls.